We had our BB guns. We were trying to stick the BB into the bark. He came up and said, "What are you guys doing?" I said, "Oh, we're trying to stick our BBs in the bark." He looked at the tree and he says, "I bet I can do that with my mouth." We said, "Oh yeah, sure, right." He says, "Here, give me a BB." Popped it in his mouth. He swished it around, got it nice and wet, and went, and he shot it into the tree. Well, at least he said he did. He says, "There it is, right there. Look in the tree. There it is." And so he started walking for the tree, looking up and down for the BB. And we almost get there. He says, "Oh, it fell out right there. It fell out." He was an amazing storyteller. He was a writer in Hollywood.
So in other words, there was no BB.
There was no BB. Exactly.
Hi, and welcome to the Flat Bill Investors Podcast. I'm Josh Zaglowski.
And I'm Zach Spencer. Welcome. Josh, it's good to be back on the podcast today with you. Today, I am happy and pleased to introduce a longtime friend of Josh's. And his area of expertise is a self-directed retirement accounts. He's managed in the banking and payroll department for the entire JCPenney company, which is pretty cool. We'll get into that a little bit. And he became a CFO. He's raised money. He's helped in M&A. And now he's formed a company we'll get into as well called Elite Pensions. That was almost 20 years ago. Today, we have Steve Barnett. Steve, welcome.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks.
It's great to be here with Josh.
Yeah, that's your biggest smile, Steve. There we go. That's good. I love it. Okay. Well, so I'll just start off by asking, how did you two meet? It sounds like you guys have a robust history.
I do. I remember how we met. Geez, I want to say 15, 20 years ago. I don't remember the year. It's before I had kids. So my oldest is 18. I was doing foreign currency at the time. And there was a gentleman in South Ogden that had a software. I was going to partner with someone on this software, and then they backed out. And somehow I got introduced to Steve.
Yeah, that's where I can't figure out what happened.
And then Steve came into the office. We met, and then we started talking about the option of being a license holder of this guy's software. And then we kind of went a different direction, and we had our own foreign currency fund. It didn't go well. Foreign currency isn't something I recommend to anybody.
That is a beast.
It was kind of like my last time of doing foreign currency is pulling that Band-Aid. Like, there's so many other opportunities out there. But Steve's a guy, Steve's a wealth of knowledge. I've learned a lot from Steve. I don't think a lot of people know about self-directed IRAs. So why don't you talk a little bit about what self-directed IRAs are and why you got into that?
Well, the way that I got into it is when I was a CFO, we raised money for companies, took them public. And we had a group of investors that I stayed quite close to. And we started investing in all things real estate, flips, foreclosures, hard money loans, rental units. And we were doing extremely well. And so one day this guy came to me, one of our investors, and says, "Steve, we're doing so well in our deals. How can I take my retirement account and invest it in them?" I said, "Mike, I know there's a way. I've been exposed to it." And so I went back to the ERISA attorneys that I dealt with at the payroll department at JCPenney. ERISA is the law that governs retirement accounts. I said, "Hey guys, this is what we want to do with our retirement accounts. How do we do this?" And they're the ones who actually showed me the structure that we used. Now, this was 21 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I asked them, I said, "Well, I remember I was driving down the freeway. They told me about it and the light bulb went off because I knew of all these opportunities." And I said, "Well, how much do you charge?" They said $10,000 to $15,000. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head. And I said, "Guys, we need to make this sort affordable to nearly anyone." Mm-hmm. And that's really how I got into it. But what it does is it allows us to free up our money in our retirement accounts and invest in things such as real estate, foreign currency, cryptocurrency, all things real estate, commercial, residential, like I mentioned earlier.
It's always funny to see what it doesn't cover. It's like rugs.
Oh yeah,
isn't it like rugs?
But
stamps.
You just mentioned that you can invest in foreign currency, and I think we already covered that today. So.
Yes, we covered that.
You can do that, but do not do that.
This is not financial advice, but maybe avoid that.
But you can invest in businesses, foreign currency.
Not foreign currency.
Not foreign currency. Yeah, you can.
Real estate, stocks, options,
things though, right?
Debentures, private placements.
Now crypto. Right.
Now crypto, yes. Just about anything you can think of.
And so basically, instead of me just giving my money to a fund manager at Charles Schwab or something, I give them my money and they just put it in a high yield account or in some sort of a mutual fund, and it just does its little thing. this allows me to say, hey, this is where I want to put my money.
You got it.
And the thing is too, to that point is not a lot of people know, but when you are at a job and you're a W-2 employee, you have a 401k. A lot of times people these days are going to new jobs or they're becoming self-employed thereafter.
Yeah.
Well, that 401k turns into an IRA, individual retirement account. Okay. What that's saying, and my sister was a good example. It sat just in that account for 2-3 years, doing nothing.
Does maybe 6% minus fees.
What's happening is the fees are just getting added up. In layman's terms, it's saying, hey, let's put into a self-directed, meaning myself can invest it into what Steve just talked about in those other plans where, like, let's say there's $80,000 there and there's a $10,000 investment into something. Let's say it's real estate. You put $10,000 in, it does whatever it does, makes maybe like 10% return. When it's done, it goes right back into that account, right? And that interest then becomes tax-free by the time you retire, right?
Still tax-free during the time you have the IRA.
Yeah, right.
Once you liquidate or once you take a distribution, then it's taxable if it's a traditional IRA, non-taxable if it's a Roth IRA.
So like when you were talking about, I can take my money, I just want people to know kind of the difference between IRA and Roth IRA. Roth IRA is after tax money, and then IRA is before tax money, which is normally 401ks and what they roll over.
And that's why some people refer to a Roth as kind of like an IRA, like on steroids. Like it's kind of like
it's a beautiful structure.
It's the beefed up
It's
version,
a beautiful structure.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story. There's a kid, I call him a kid. He was probably 23 years old. He came to me and said, Steve, I want to set up a total control IRA. That's the brand name that I gave it. I ask questions to my clients, and make sure that they qualify for it, and make sure that everything's going to work for them. And I asked him the question. I said, how much money do you have in your IRA? He says, well, I have about $6,000. I says, I'm not sure this is the right structure for you at this time. This may not be the right structure for you. It may be cost prohibitive. And he says, Steve, you don't understand. I said, all right, I'm happy to do it. So we set him up, and he had an investment where he could double his IRA every time he flipped some inventory. Boom, boom, boom. All right, 7 years passed. He's now probably 30 years old. The CPA called me up and says, Steve, I have a tax question on Mark's IRA. Can you help me? I said, sure, shoot. And so after we were done, I said, by the way, what does Mark have in his IRA now? And he says he has 45 single-family homes, and he's making $65,000 a month in his IRA.
Good for him.
Good for Mark.
So he's turned $6,000 into probably tens of millions of dollars. Now, here's the kicker. It's a Roth IRA. He'll never pay taxes on that money again.
Good for him.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
I've had so many different opportunities and jobs over the years, but I've had my life insurance license for a long time. And we used to do presentations for people that were close to retirement, and one of the parts of the PowerPoint that was given to me that I studied with was the actual story behind Senator Roth and bringing that, because he saw more people, and it was done in 1979, the year I was born, but there was more and more people that are becoming self-employed. And so he saw like, hey, there needs to be an opportunity for those people that are going to have after tax money that they can put into something. Yeah. And I can't remember what's the term in retirement when you hit 70 that you're supposed to take
required minimum distributions.
RMDs. Not a lot of people knows that. Do you know what that is?
I've heard of them.
RMDs.
I'm not there yet. But.
So let's say a person is W-2 employee for till they die, and they retire at 65. By 70, the IRS makes them
73.
73? Yeah. I thought it was 70 and a half.
It used to be.
Oh, okay. They moved it.
Trump changed that.
Makes them take out the money.
Yeah.
And they have to pay tax on it. If they don't, they get penalized almost a huge amount. And with Roth, there's no RMD.
Yeah.
We even tried to convince people, say, like this one guy I did it for, he had $800,000. We rolled it from an IRA to a Roth IRA and said, hey, pay taxes on it now. And then, but as we grow this over the next 10, 20 years, you won't have that. And you won't have to worry about the RMD.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that's the way to go. If you're looking at putting some money somewhere.
Yeah.
That's somewhat.
I'm seeing more financial advisors advising that.
Well, when I go speak in front of a group, I always get the question, should I have a traditional IRA or Roth IRA? I say, you want my opinion or the expert's opinion? And they say, well, give us both. I say, well, it's one and the same. I mean, if you have an investment where you can make enough money to offset the taxes that you'll pay later, backdoor Roth IRA is what it's called. And it really is an incredible tool for retirement.
So Elite Pensions, you said it's been around 21 years?
19 years.
19 years,
Yeah.
coming up on 20.
Yeah.
Why'd you come up with the name Elite Pensions?
Well, when I started the company, it's really kind of funny. I had my son helping me. We were trying to think of a name, and he's the one who actually came up with the name Elite Pensions. And I remember we got up early in the morning, started working on it hard, and we came up with this name. And then we're saying to ourselves at about 9 a.m, okay, what do we do now? And so we opened the phone book.
How old was he at the time?
Oh, he was like 18 or 19 years old.
Oh, I'm surprised.
Yeah.
I didn't know what a pension was when I was that age.
Yeah.
Because that's different. That's different than self-directed IRAs,
Yeah,
but still,
yeah.
it's got the same meaning of taking money
You'll
when
have to
you
ask,
die.
you've got an 18-year-old, ask him what he knows about pensions today.
I know, right?
But
That's true.
We ran out of things to do at 9 o'clock. So we literally opened the yellow pages back then. And we went down and looked through different businesses and said, okay, where could we maybe talk to somebody here and maybe sell our IRAs, our retirement account? And we came across a guy out of Ogden. His name's Brian. And he's the first guy ever set up. And I called him up, and he was selling real estate and teaching people how to invest in real estate. And he was actually doing it through another company. So I went up to his office, sat down with him. I was scared to death. First time I ever done this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I presented it to him, and he said, I think I'll go with you. I go, oh my gosh, that's incredible. Yeah.
Did you know what to do after that? After you said yes?
I mean, I was competent enough. I'd been studying it for a year, quite frankly, after I learned about it.
Uh-huh.
But still, I was scared to death.
Sure.
That's the first time I've ever done one.
That's the entrepreneurship,
Oh,
right?
yeah,
That's my book that's coming out. Take your shot. You took your shot.
That's
It
exactly
is
right.
such a reoccurring theme. If you'll go back through and listen to a handful of the interviews we've done on this podcast, there's countless amount of people that they say, well, I didn't know what to do next. So I opened up the phone book and I started dialing.
Yeah.
And they just, that's probably 2 or 3 or 4 people out of the few episodes we've done that have said, I just started calling people.
Yeah.
It's funny because I'm just reading a book right now that he said he did the same thing. This author, he said, I got to the door and I'm not even wearing the right brand because I haven't even made shirts yet.
Yeah.
The guy said, sure, I'll take it. And he goes, well, I don't actually have a team yet, but hang on, basically. So you're kind of in that space.
I was kind of in the same boat.
Mhm.
And then after that, this is where the magic or the miracle actually took place. He referred me to another guy. I set him up. And then he referred me to a pilot who was working for Delta Airlines. And at that time, Delta was in negotiations with their pilots to rearrange their pension plan.
Mm.
And they had the opportunity to roll it into an IRA. And so he heard about me. He wanted to invest in a business. And so we set him up. He invested in the business. And then he flew with another pilot who wanted to do it, who flew with another pilot who wanted to do it. And it took off from there. And so my son and I were thinking, where do we want to go next? What market do we want to go to next? We said, what about Las Vegas? So I went down to Las Vegas. I had some contacts there. I went and I met with every one of those contacts. And there was a guy that was actually doing a private placement. And he said, I gave him the spiel. He says, well, what do you want me to do? I said, well, send your IRAs through me. He says, okay. And then he lined me up with a guy out of Washington. He had a group that he was putting together where they were talking about investment opportunities. And we went to Cancun, and he invited me to speak.
I remember you told me you were on the travel circuit.
There were 700 people that came, and they had to pay $7,000 just to be there. That did not include airfare or hotel.
Mm.
And so I thought, man, I better do good at this. And so this was during the summertime. So for 6 weeks, every morning made sure I was up. I went outside in my backyard, sat in the lounge chair, and I wrote a talk. I memorized, I rewrote, I rememorized, and went for 6 weeks. I did that. And I stood in front of the audience with 700 people, scared to death. And I gave a speech. And afterwards, they have booths that they can come and meet you. And a lady came, and I was at lunch. My wife was at the booth, and she said, your husband did a good job. And she said, well, he's really not a public speaker. And she says, well, he is now. And so, but from there, instead of just Salt Lake and Las Vegas, it went national.
That's cool. That's awesome.
And all of a sudden it became a referral business.
You and I have talked many times on self-directed IRAs. For the audience, I mean, there's other companies that do it now, but a lot of them do it under individual. How do you do it different than others?
Well, I mean, there's 2 models, truthfully. And one is you put your money with the custodian, you present the investment to them, and they will approve it or disapprove it. And then from there, they'll do all the documentation for you. They'll do all the investing for you. They do all the work, but they nickel and dime you to death, plus charge you an annual fee. Mine, I think, is a little bit more powerful in the sense that we actually give you checkbook control of all your retirement assets. So if you want to invest in a flip, once we set you all up, you have checkbook control of your retirement assets. So if you want to buy a rental unit or a flip or something like that, you just wire the money to title. Title then gets you the house, you remodel it, or you rent it out, you bring the money back in from the profits, back into the checking account and go look for your next opportunity. So you don't get nickel and dime to death. You don't pay those annual fees. Well, you do pay an annual fee. Sorry, I apologize for that. Every custodian charges an annual fee, but you just don't get nickel and dime to death. And you have complete control in what you want to invest in. You mentioned earlier that you can't invest in rugs. There's actually 3 things you cannot invest in. Life insurance, simple enough. We all know what that is. Collectibles. Collectibles are things like art, wines, antiques, rugs, things
stamps,
that are,
I think.
Stamps, yeah, that's another one. That's exactly
Coins.
right. But the third one is more conceptual in nature, and that means you cannot invest in anything that would be considered self-dealing. In other words, now that you have the ability to make a loan with your IRA, you can't give your kids a loan. You can't involve anybody straight up and down in your family tree. Your grandparents, your parents, your spouse, your kids, your grandkids.
Arm's length at least.
Arm's length. I mean, if you bought a rental unit and you wanted to rent it out to your mother, you can't do that. But if you wanted to go sideways on your family tree and rent it out to your brother, that's perfectly okay. So you can't go up and down your family tree, but you can go sideways.
That's why I give loans to Zach and he gives me loans.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
that's a circular thing right there. The IRS is not going to look at that.
Yeah, that's good.
One thing I want to go over, Zach and I always talk about, we get a lot of information prior to, actually starting the podcast, dropping it today. Yeah. You talked about something that I thought was pretty cool that I think the audience needs to hear on your top 5. Can you go over that a little bit?
When I was growing up.
And everyone listen closely.
Yeah,
this was pretty cool.
Gold.
When I was growing up, there were a lot of people who had a lot of influence in my life. Okay. And one guy, he was an amazing individual. I met him when I was 7 years old. We were on a fathers and sons outing up at Green River. We had our BB guns. We were trying to stick the BB into the bark. And he came up and said, "What are you guys doing?" "Oh, we're trying to stick our BBs in the bark." He looked at the tree and he says, "I bet I can do that with my mouth." We said, "Oh yeah, sure, right." He says, "Here, give me a BB." Popped it in his mouth. Now this guy's larger than life. He truly is. And I'll give you a little background on him. But he swished it around, got it nice and wet. He went, and he shot it into the tree. Well, at least he said he did. He says, "There it is right there. Look in the tree. There it is." And so he started walking for the tree, looking up and down for the BB. And we almost get there. He says, "Oh, it fell out right there. It fell out." He was an amazing storyteller. He was a writer in Hollywood.
So in other words, there was no BB.
There was no BB. Exactly.
But to the group of 7 and 8 year olds, they thought it was pretty sweet.
It was really cool. He played for the White Sox, played baseball for the White Sox. He played football for the Browns. He was bald and he was bossy. And so we called him Big Bossy Baldy.
Oh, that's funny.
All right. So fast forward in high school, during my youth, he was a Sunday school teacher. But during high school, I built houses. And he was my foreman for 3 years. And so we got to know each other incredibly well. And when I was older, married, had kids, sports, and busy with life, every day I lived up on the hill and I'd drive by his house. And I would say to myself, I need to go see Jim. He's such a great guy. I need to tell him how much I appreciate him, how much I loved him, how much he meant to me. And so every single day I passed his house. I need to go see Jim. I need to go see Jim. One day I drove by, Jim was gone. He had died. And so I sat down and I listed the top 5 people in my life who had the greatest influence on my life. And outside of my father's my hero. His business is right across the street from here.
That's what you said.
Yeah, that's funny.
Cool.
Yeah. So I can walk across the street and see him afterwards.
That's awesome.
But I said to myself, I need to go and visit the rest of these people before they die and tell them how much they meant to me and how much I love them.
Yeah.
And so it was, when I did that, it was an incredible experience. 3 of them are now dead. And I'm so grateful that I was able to do that.
Yeah.
And I would exhort everybody to go and make their list, however many, and go and tell those people how much they meant to them. And there was one common thread as I reflected back on them. Why did these people have the most influence in my life? And here's what I want people to think about mostly, is that they took a special interest in my life and made me an important person in their life. And it was an incredible experience.
I think that's great. It's interesting because I'm sitting here thinking about, putting my list together, but also the people that I already are kind of put in my top 10, let's say.
Yeah.
And I think at the very least, people need to start out with a text, but then, it's best to do it in person, but start somewhere. Cause I mean, like you said, is the coulda, woulda, shoulda mentality.
Exactly.
Man, I drove past that house every day. And,
there's a term that I hear a lot, and I heard it this morning talking with Josh and Gunnar, was relationship capital.
Yeah.
You think about how, with your bank accounts or other capital that you might hold, but our relationships are really probably more valuable than any other form of capital we can have. And I think that's amazing advice. And motivates me to go, okay, who have I not said hi to? Or somebody that pops in your mind every once in a while and go, I should.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You don't, but you should.
Well, you and I always talk about the book, The Go-Giver, right? Something just happened to me about 3 months ago is I kind of built up a new friendship and relationship with a guy who owns a lot of dealerships. And he was taking me to his headquarters about 3-4 months ago. And as we were walking through it, he was introducing me to people in different departments. And we get to this one department and the guy turns around and he goes, hey, this is, I'll just say his name, Tyler. I'm like, Tyler? And it's a guy I played basketball with 15 years ago. And we were playing together 2-3 days a week for 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And I haven't seen him for 15 years. Like, hey, what's going on, man? And we just started talking. And then later that day, he texts me and goes, hey, let's go to lunch this next week. So we went to Crown Burger just in Layton. Good place, right?
Great place. Where Josh and I first met.
It is a good place.
That's our first place we first met.
I try not to eat there a lot, but it's really good.
That's our first date. That's Zach and I's first date.
Pastrami's good for you. It's the buns and the sauce.
And the onion rings.
Anyways, we sat down, we just started talking, and about halfway through the conversation, he goes, hey, I just had to ask you, like, what's the angle here? I'm like, what do you mean? Well, I mean, because the guy that owns these dealerships, does well financially. And I'm like, actually, I wasn't even thinking about that. I just want to build, I have a thing about building relationship capital, just building relationships and cultivating those. And, you talk about like what you did with those top 5 people. You also think about like, you have to be vulnerable. Like if I'm sitting with Zach and like saying, hey, you have influenced my life so much over the last 20, 30 years. It's actually hard to even say that.
It is.
Yeah. It's not like a natural thing. No. But I'll bet it gets easier the more you do it.
Right. On the 5th one.
Yeah. By the time you're done, you go, hey.
Then you list your next 5.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. Well, Steve, it's been a pleasure having you here. And I'm glad you were able to make it today.
Yep.
And I know Zach's learned a lot.
Yeah, 100%.
Like he was saying with what Gunnar and I were saying today, and what, Zach and I try to meet on a bi-weekly basis on kind of going over what we can do better, not only for the podcast, but in our own lives. So we appreciate that, Steve.
Oh, it's my pleasure, you guys. Thank you so much. It's been great. And Josh has been a great friend, and Zach, it's great to meet you.
Good new friend.
Thank you so much.
If people want to get advice or work with you on their pension or their IRA or their Roth, where can they get a hold of you?
Well, they can find me at elitepensions.com.
Okay.
Or they can call me at 801-916-2600.
Okay. I love that. That's easy.
And we'll make sure we put that in the description of the podcast as well. Well, good. Without further ado, it's been an awesome day. Until then, invest in your future.
Invest in yourself.
This is the Flat Bill Podcast. Signing off.